DeepSeek, a Chinese company, just came out with an AI model that's just as good as the ones in the US, but cost one-tenth as much to train and didn't need any advanced NVIDIA chips to do it. Some say it's a hoax, some say it's the beginning of an AI crash. In this video, I'm going to explain in as simple a terms as I can what happened, why some investors are so worried, but others are so skeptical, and what the potential investment implications are. Let's dive in, starting with some background of what happened. Let's begin the story back in September 2024 when OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, released its first reasoning model called O1. To understand how a reasoning model is different from the LLMs, aka large language models, which I'll mostly just refer to as chatbots from here on out for simplicity, like ChatGPT, that came before it, imagine if you were asked a simple question with a simple answer. Let's say something like, how many inches are in a foot? Your mind goes straight to the answer without really having to think much about it. Most chatbots, up to that point, were the equivalent of just blurting out the first thing that came to your mind, and for questions like that, they worked pretty well. But let's imagine instead that you're asked a more complicated question, like, is it nice outside? You might think, well, hey, using my eyes, I can see that the sky is blue, so it looks nice, and the temperature feels comfortable on my skin, but it's a little windy and it's messing up my hair, or like, whatever, right? For certain types of questions, there's more that you have to think about to come up with the right answer. Up to that point, the thinking, so to speak, that a chatbot did was the kind of thinking that is better suited to just giving you a simple, quick answer. And that works better for some kinds of questions than others, as I'm sure we've all seen funny examples of. Reasoning models, like the one that OpenAI came out with in September, are better at more challenging questions. They take a problem apart and solve it step by step, like how you considered all the different ways that it may or may not have been nice outside to come up with a more informed answer. Once OpenAI came out with their O1 reasoning model, everyone else raced to copy it. Google released Gemini Flash Thinking in December. Then a few days later, OpenAI countered with an updated version of their O1 model, which they called O3. But actually, before Google got there, a Chinese tech company called Alibaba released an updated version of its own chatbot called QWQ with the same reasoning capabilities. They actually beat Google to it. And actually, even before that, another Chinese company called DeepSeek had released a preview of its own reasoning model called R1. They were actually founded by a hedge fund called High Flyer, which was started in 2015 to use AI to gain an edge in investing. And it actually used it pretty successfully to become one of China's biggest quant funds. But their motivation wasn't purely for their own profit. Just like the first backers of OpenAI, they had a bigger long term mission to create human like AI. And so in 2023, they announced that they would spin off their AI research business as DeepSeek. Despite the US government's attempts to curb the Chinese AI industry, not one, but two companies had reduced the US's lead to just a couple months. Now, the fact that these models are Chinese actually isn't even really what the market is concerned about. The main concern is that DeepSeek claims it was able to train its model with about 2,000 old crappy chips instead of 16,000 new, way more expensive chips that Meta's latest model used, or about one-tenth the cost of the leading models out there. And it achieves highly competitive performance in a lot of math and science related areas compared to a lot of leading models out there. So the market concern goes like this. If the new technology allows companies to produce competitive models much more cheaply with just a few old crappy chips instead of a ton of new expensive ones, then why would these hyperscalers, aka big tech companies, keep spending hundreds of billions of dollars to develop these large language models, aka chatbots, at the leading edge? Those are called frontier models, by the way, like the ones that are on the frontier that come first. Why would they do that if they could save hundreds of billions of dollars and develop a model that was just as good a few weeks later? And if they don't keep spending all that money, NVIDIA is screwed. And then to a lesser extent, so is the entire AI trade and most of the US stock market. That's why all the companies that have seen their stock prices bid up over the last couple of years because of their potential to provide energy or cooling systems or other supporting technologies are all now selling off. Yet, other companies like Meta are doing well because for them, developing these models is mainly just a cost and they're mostly just using them for their own benefit. So the market is saying, well, if they can save hundreds of billions of dollars, that's great. Another concern is that DeepSeek released their model as open source, meaning anybody can download it and use it, tweak it, build off of it. and they're pricing it at about 90 or 95% cheaper than the O1 model from OpenAI. So again, the thought process is, how are these companies going to make any return on the hundreds of billions of dollars they've invested in building all these data centers? If companies don't need a ton of expensive AI chips anymore, and it's either way cheaper or there's just simply no incentive to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on data centers or developing frontier AI models, then there needs to be a massive reset in expectations for a lot of these AI beneficiary companies. That's the gist of the market's concern. Now, some other people would say it seems like a hoax. Here's why. First, there's some evidence that DeepSeek may have actually gotten its hands on 50,000 of NVIDIA's most advanced H100 chips, which are banned in China, through back channels like smuggling them into China from data centers in other countries. And if that's true, their claim that they were able to build this without spending all that money is total BS. Some people are saying they just had to lie about using those chips since they weren't supposed to have them in the first place. The second reason people are skeptical is that there's evidence to point to the fact that this model was trained on top of an existing model, and the cost of building that existing frontier model didn't change, but they also didn't factor it into the $6 million training cost that they quoted. So there's a huge unknown cost that they're just ignoring. So we don't really know how much it actually cost them or whether the frontier model they used actually did still require a bunch of advanced NVIDIA chips. Probably it did. Training a large language model or chatbot is sort of like teaching something to your kids. You are the frontier model. You're their example. The kids imitate what you do. They watch and they try to repeat, like trial and error, trying to get the same result. But without you, they don't have anything to learn from. So in reality, they would not actually develop the same way. So saying DeepSeek's model got to where it did for only $6 million is sort of like saying your kid grew up and developed into a happy, successful adult without giving any credit to all the work that their parents, teachers, coaches, or other mentors did to help them get there. So, where do I stand and what does all this really mean? Well, as many of you know, I have called for a coming AI bust, and I still think there will be one. Maybe I was a few weeks early, or maybe more. Headline aside, in the video I explained that the timing would be hard to predict. But while I do still stand behind everything I said in that video, I'm not quite sure this is the moment I was waiting for. It could be. And to be sure, there's a lot we still don't know, but here's why I think the truth is probably somewhere in between hoax and massive imminent AI crash. The first reason is that it's not a hoax because even though it did really cost them a lot more to produce than $6 million, it also appears they actually did make some genuine breakthroughs. For example, one of the advancements they made was to break the model up into a series of what they call experts. Think of these like specialist departments within one big organization: your accountants, your engineers, your salespeople, etc. You can see there are way more parameters in DeepSeek's model than some of the other prominent ones out there, but it only uses a fraction of them when you ask it a question. Think of it like just sending an accounting question to the accounting department instead of emailing the whole company. Or maybe a better example would be turning on the lights in just the room that you're in versus the other models that have to turn them all on at the same time. This way, you can have a lot more lights in the house and you get just as good, if not better, lighting for whatever you're doing at the time, but you still use much less electricity and you can be much more energy efficient. Even if the claimed cost savings are exaggerated, AI costs really are coming down significantly, and I do think there are real reasons to question the ROI on all these hundreds of billions of dollars these companies are spending. That's a big part of my thesis for why there will be a period where expectations will have to adjust downward a lot for many of these AI companies. Yet, semiconductor, aka microchip costs, like the ones that power AI models, phones, computers, and everything digital, have been coming down for the last 30 years. There's always some new technology that makes them cheaper or more efficient or requires you to use fewer of them, and it can cause a downturn in the short term, or it can cause a change in leadership. And certainly, whenever there are companies making margins like NVIDIA is, and there are a lot of highly motivated, well funded competing interests, that's certainly a possibility. But in the long run, these advancements have always led to more demand for semiconductors because new use cases have emerged. I think that's what is likely to happen here. It's called Jevons paradox, which is when technological advancements make a resource more efficient to use, which reduces the amount needed in the short term, but then as the cost of the resource drops, overall demand ends up increasing in the long run. So what seems like a bad thing in the short term turns out to be a good thing in the long term. If the cost to train a model comes down, which it very well could and already had been doing before DeepSeek came along, then maybe more models proliferate and there's less advantage to having the frontier models. Maybe every country wants their own model for national security purposes. And then the next step is a lot more inference. That means like actually using the models to do stuff. There's training, as in building the model, and then there's inference, as in using the model. To draw a parallel with the internet, training is like putting in fiber optic cables, modems, and routers to make the internet actually work. Inference is building apps on top of it, like Facebook and Netflix. Once these models become a lot cheaper to use, a lot more people will use them. So, could this change the leadership and lead to a short term sell off in AI stocks? 100% it could. But I think in the long run, it could also be a good thing for AI adoption and for some of these companies. The next thing we have to think about is the true motivation for spending all this money to create these frontier models. They're not doing it because they just want to do the same thing they were doing before, but slightly cheaper. They're doing it because they believe in this grand vision of developing human like artificial intelligence, and they want to be the first to do it. So, even if one or two hyperscalers does drop off, I think some companies will still be willing to pony up the dough for these big AI projects. What I think is more likely to change that is if there's no money in it and investors really start to punish them. Think Meta in its quest to build the metaverse. Heck, they even changed their name to Meta. Remember, they used to be called Facebook, but investors really didn't like them losing all that money investing in the metaverse, which may or may not ever make them a profit. And once they pulled that spending back, then their stock price recovered massively. That could still happen with AI, but I don't buy the argument that just because it's cheaper to be a follower, everyone will want to be a follower. Some will still want to be leaders. And early evidence to back that up is that a few days before DeepSeek's latest model was released, the Chinese government announced a $137 billion AI investment plan, which means they still believe they'll need to invest a lot in AI infrastructure. And a lot of senior leaders in the AI community have also come out publicly and said they're not changing their spending plans either. Could they change their minds? For sure, but the evidence suggests that they haven't done so yet. With respect to China, too, there are also major questions about how much they'll be able to keep advancing. They may not have used NVIDIA's most advanced H100 chips, which were banned in China, but they probably did use their only slightly less advanced H800 chips, but those were banned in China this past October. It may take a few years to play out, but that could actually slow down China's progress more meaningfully. Or maybe not. I mean, they did make some pretty incredible advancements in 5G that no one thought they could make due to the US tech bans in place, so I wouldn't fully count them out. In the end, I don't have a crystal ball, but I hope this video has simplified things for you and helped you understand why the market has been behaving the way that it has so you can make more informed investment decisions. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button, leave a comment with what you'd like us to cover next, and subscribe so you won't miss it. And if you'd like to connect with my partner Kyle and I directly, you can do so by joining our Discord through the link in the description below.